Thank you so much, Imran and BOF, for having me. I'm really excited and honored to be here today. I had this really cute, flowery speech I was excited to give, but given what's happening in Iran right now, I think it's only fair to sort of take a step back and talk about the situation and kind of contextualize that. So right now, it's been almost a week in which the Iranian government has actually shut down the internet, and Shirin, Shiva, and I couldn't even be in touch until they landed in the UK. I haven't been able to be in touch with my family for the past near week either. And this sort of constant and current sort of uprising or protests are really in part due to economic insecurities and a sort of economic degradation of society that has been caused by government corruption and mismanagement of funds, but also US and UK sanctions that have literally crippled society. Every single Iranian, every single day, is affected by sanctions by this country and by the United States. Things like medicine is unaffordable. Everyday curable diseases people are dying from because they don't have access to medical care or medicine because of the high prices. Food, commodities, everyday little things are so inaccessible to every Iranian right now because of the situation. And so it's so important that, yes, what's happening in Iran is horrible, but I think we also have to understand that the United States and the UK and many of our countries are also complicit in what's happening right now. The reason, and these difficulties that Shirin and Shiva will be talking about more, both domestically but also from the sanctions that these countries are having, creates a larger, more complicated situation that we really need to be unpacking. And fashion is inherently political and intertwined in all of this. And yes, obviously in Iran, there's a mandatory dress code, and fashion may be a little bit more political explicitly there, but throughout the entire world, there is no such thing as apolitical fashion. It does not exist. If anybody says that their fashion is apolitical, please punch them. This Muslim is condoning violence. Please don't call prevent on me. But it's true, because fashion ultimately at its core is a mode of communication. We're communicating something. We're able to convey really powerful messages, tell people about a culture, about society, or we're not, and we're silent. And silence is complacency. At a time where we truly cannot afford to be, the world is fucking on, I can say fucking? The world is fucking on fire right now. How can we ever think that what we're creating and putting out in the world should not be engaging with this? And all of us wear clothes and are in the business of fashion. I did not even mean that fun. And yet, are we actually truly grappling with the complexities of how fashion is truly political on so many levels? Beyond just a slogan, which could mean or not mean something based on where you're producing it, fashion is even more inherently political if we think about production and consumption. What does it mean that the majority of our clothes are produced in Southeast Asia by people who look like me, and yet the majority of it is consumed here in the West? How our whole industry relies upon and continues to profit from histories of imperialism, genocide, sanctions that have plagued the entire world, and yet we still profit from it. We're living in an active empire. The British Empire still exists. People are still profiting off of the fact that there is no economic growth happening in countries like Indonesia because we profit from it. And we value this, and our entire industry is built upon it. So what does that mean? And also, the fact that fashion literally frames our bodies. Like literally, every time we step outside, we're deciding how we want our body to be actually presented in the world. There's nothing else that's more intimately connected to our identities or the manifestation of that in public space than fashion. It literally wraps us, it touches our skin. So what does it mean for something that's made in a product of violence to be rubbing off on our skin every single day? We're so concerned about what we eat, what goes in our bodies. But how about what touches our skin constantly, every single day, most nights, some nights. But also what it conveys about maybe religion, the fact that I'm visibly Muslim. My experiences growing up in the United States as someone visibly Muslim has been marked with physical assault, being called terrorist every single day. And this is a reality that every day I step out of my house and choose to present myself in a way that I know that I'm going to be added to another government surveillance watch list. And if you don't have to think about every day when you step outside of your house, who is going to profile you or what police is going to stop you and search you, that's privilege. That doesn't make that decision any less political. So we have to think about that. And right now, especially, the fact that the Muslim identity is trending in the fashion industry, my identity is sexy. Every single person wants a Muslim who looks like me walking down their runway in their latest campaign. But how can we have the fact that right now we're at a time of heightened anti-Muslim racism on a global level, partnered with the time that we see Muslim faces taking up space across fashion magazines? What does that mean for our industry? Is that a trend? Or are we actually substantially dealing with and grappling with the manifestations of what it means to support Muslims, what it means to support people of color? How can Nike, for example, create a pro-hijab that was created with the raw materials by Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps in Western China, passed down to Muslims in Indonesia working in sweatshops to produce those Nike apparel, and then sold here and then be applauded and praised for being so pro-Muslim? Why are we allowing brands and the whole entire fashion industry to simplify and reduce our identities into just a hijab? A hijab is not synonymous with being Muslim. But we allow fashion right now to reduce, simplify, and completely annihilate the movements and identities in which we've been working on for decades. I actually call this revolution washing. It's like greenwashing, which I think most of us are familiar with, but it's with the revolution. Every brand wants to be sexy and part of the revolution right now, but what are you actually doing? Are you actually simplifying and reducing and taking away the significance of what it means to be Muslim, the complex experiences of what it feels like to wear a hijab every single day and know that the government simultaneously is going to use that against me or use that to invade Afghanistan? And so I'm really excited, my rant, really excited to also be able to be with Shirin and Shiva on this panel to understand that the world is fucking complicated. Like, there's a lot, shit is happening every day, everywhere. But rather than just being afraid of that and taking a step back and being like, okay, we're gonna make this simple, like I don't wanna be controversial, we have to engage with that. Fashion should not be in the business of simplifying things, but embracing the complexity and really being able to grapple and imagine a better world and then actively work toward building that. So thank you so much.
She did that impromptu. That's amazing. Thank you. Now I'm going to welcome Masoud, Shirin, and Shiva to talk to us some more and go in further depth on the conversation.
Is this working?
Yes.
Okay, so hello everyone. Western governments often worry about Iran developing nuclear weapons. You should worry about our women. 40 million more. Where that comes from. But thank you. She is a treasure. Thank you, everyone. I think we're gonna. I'm gonna do my best to be the kind of the framer of conversations. Maybe to cool things down a bit. Let them.
I'm heated. I can go on.
Maybe I'd love for you to share one at a time. Maybe how you came to fashion, and why you chose fashion as a. Maybe we should start with you, Shiva.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you, BOF and Imran, for having us here. It's really a great opportunity for us to be here. It started for us as a very young age. We used to see our mom and aunts making clothes out of pre-made patterns from fashion magazines, and we just like imitated them by making clothes out of my grandmother's praying chador, and we used to drape them. Yeah. After we got older, we started to make changes to our own clothes, and we used to get so many compliments, but we didn't get it very serious because it wasn't a thing to be a fashion designer. So we did different things. I studied business management, Shirin studied visual arts, but we weren't very happy with what we were doing. It was about 2012. Instagram was very popular among everybody. Yeah. We said, okay, we should do something we love together, and we have this opportunity to show our work. So we started Vaqar in 2013.
Amazing. Obviously, the very particular thing about doing fashion in Iran is that the very idea of it is sort of kind of illegal, like to produce it without restriction, to be creative without, like the way normal fashion creatives are creative, is a sort of breaking the law. Then distribution is difficult, as you know. Production is almost impossible.
Yes.
But we've made huge strides in communicating fashion, I feel. I feel in many ways we kind of lead the world by the sophisticated use of social media, for example. I thought maybe we can also just talk about the issue of hijab, because it's like kind of like the elephant in the room before we move forward. I mean, it's a kind of long and complex history. I would love Hoda to elaborate on this a bit more. But, I grew up in the 60s. My auntie, there was kind of enforced dehijabization. So the sort of, it was the secularists who were in power. So for my auntie to go and study in university, she had to take her headscarf off. But for my sister, after the revolution, to go to university, she had to put the headscarf on, both times against their will. So this is a kind of history of kind of force and pressure applied to women and women's body that kind of contextualizes your life. And I have to say, I feel very guilty as an Iranian male here. But Hodajan, maybe you can pick that up and just sort of say how it kind of frames your reference.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think this is a really important question, given that when we think about Iran today, we think just what we see on television, all black and white, and that's obviously not the case. And I think that fashion has also played such an interesting and fascinating role in shaping gender, and particularly queerness in Iran, and the way in which hijab has sort of been strung along. And so I want to show some images, if this clicker's, okay. So to take us a little bit back in the day, and that font is so small. Okay, 19th century, Qajar dynasty. So this is an Islamic dynasty during in Iran that also, if we look at fashion during this time, we see the majority of people wearing long, loose, flowy clothes. And if anyone can kind of guess what's happening in this photo, this is actually called the amorous couple. Amorous couple because they can't even identify, historians still can't identify gender on this image, and there's a reason for that. Is because during this time in Iran, gender was not defined in the same way that we define it here in the West. In the West, everyone loves to hyper-categorize and put a box around every single fucking thing, but that's not just how people didn't identify based on who they had sex with in Iran in the 19th century and beyond. And across the Middle East, actually, this is very common. And so we see in this image a very clear indication that sort of gender fluidity was pretty normative in Iran, and the fashion really mirrors that. And we see that everywhere that we look, a lot of sort of the sort of gender ambiguity was pretty normative in Iran. Fast forward a few years, as Iran starts having relations actually with the United Kingdom, British parliamentarians during these economic deals in order to strike and sort of build economic relations, British parliamentarians started coming over to Iran and then going back. And it's kind of a funny story, but because British people were wearing these tight-ass pantaloons, and Iranians were dressing like this, by the time that British parliamentarians went back to the government, we see, oh, I thought it disappeared. Okay, we see these Iranian dignitarians actually sending lustful letters back to the U.S.
To the men.
To the U.K., yeah, to the men, being like, that ass though.
The tight pants, the tight pants, we love that.
Yeah, because they were wearing very tight clothing, and Iranians were dressed like this. So, of course, one of the biggest threats to the patriarchy or imperialism is a man becoming the object of desire. So, through that time, the British actually blamed Islam for why queerness was so normative in Iran. They're like, because your women are covered, your men are lusting after the wrong people. You have to be lusting after women. So you guys are all backwards because you're gay, which is funny given what the conversation is now about Iran. And so through this sort of wanting to have economic and stronger economic relationships with Iran, a sort of forced heterosexuality of Iran came about, and in part enforced through the clothing. So specifically, there was actually a Pahlavi hat rule this image. That ugly ass hat that he's wearing, that was mandatory. Like you had to wear that for men every time you left your house because they were trying to make Iranians look more British. So that you would look more modern and you'd be able to get these economic deals. The same thing was happening to women. So there was actually a period of forced unveiling that everyone loves to conveniently forget in Iran as well, where, as Masoud Jan also mentioned, stories of his aunt being forced to unveil in order to go to the university. My grandma has similar stories. And the role of fashion in sort of making sure that women became the object of desire and created this sort of huge class difference in Iran where hijab became a marker of low socioeconomic class and higher economic classes that were able to have relationships with the UK, sort of dress in manners like that. As we progress, the revolution in 1979 happened as actually very heavily influenced by Marxism as well. And after the revolution happened, a lot of Marxist ideology was inspired by that they wanted to create a society in which class was erased, so this sort of egalitarian form of dress in which you wouldn't be able to tell who was lower class and who was upper class. So they forced hijab, or a headscarf, on all Iranian women. Of course, this is still barbaric, just as much as forced unveiling is as well. And so this also marks the time right after the revolution where Iran started a war with Iran and Iraq had war. So the entire fashion industry was also destroyed. So all efforts would be able to be directed toward the war front. And we also see images from advertisements and women holding bags to images of this male war martyr covering sort of public space in Iran, and that continues to today. So we still see this sort of almost queerness in the images. We see this very like rosy cheeks, this very like effeminate features on the faces that we still see that sort of remnant from that time. And these people, the Gasht Irshad, basically they're like the fashion police.
Well, they enforce Islamic
But the opposite.
morality and codes of dress. So they're not normally this good looking.
This is a screenshot from a movie.
This is from a movie.
They don't look this cool. But they basically, every time they see a fashion faux pas in their eyes, they can actually cite you and ticket you. And so it sort of has also now created this sort of ambiguity in terms of public spaces, particularly in Tehran, where one day you could get stopped by your outfit and the next day they could just like ignore you and keep walking. So this has sort of left the enforcement of these dress codes really in the hands of the Gasht Irshad. So as presidents have changed and different forms of leniency, laws and regulations have come and shaped the space, also the fashion industry has started to thrive as well. And also that cute photo is Shirin and June over there. When we first met, best friends in 2015. And so this is that last photo is a photo from my book. And the middle photo is actually a photo from their latest collection with a different label. And so right now what we're seeing is a lot of this dress code that we feel like is so strict actually loosening up. There's a lot of sort of various regulations that we see. People are normatively breaking the law in Iran, and almost every single young person does it. And we see also this sort of play on gender ambiguity and inspiration being very multifaceted as the people have today now too.
No, so you see it's a bit complicated. Basically. I'd love to ask Shirin, the creative part of the duo, you know, being a designer is a tough enough job everywhere. You can see it's a little bit more complex and complicated. Tell us about your experience and how you tackle, how do you do what you do?
Hello, everybody. I want to thank BOF for having us. Sorry for my English. I'm going to talk in Persian, so Masoud can translate for me. همونطور که هدا گفتش با توجه به چیزهایی که توی فاکتورهایی که توی ایران هستش
As Hoda said, there are tons of restrictions applying to what I do in Iran.
همه دیزاینرها از جمله ما از این نقطه منفی استفاده که به صورت مثبت استفاده کرد.
All designers in Iran kind of in a way forced to turn what's a negative into a positive point.
و این باعث شدش که ما از این موقعیت استفاده کنیم و با وجود محدودیت‌ها لباس‌های طراحی شده بتونیم برای خانم‌ها درست کنیم.
This has actually provided a kind of launching pad for a new form of creativity and for a new form of design, especially for women's wear, a sort of zigzagging way through the regulation and kind of finding new forms. Sorry.
و برای ما اول کار این یه انگیزه شد که لباسایی درست کنیم که به جای اینکه خانم‌ها اونا رو مجبور باشن بپوشن، اونها رو انتخاب کنن و دوست داشته باشن و یه بار سنگینی رو برداریم براشون کم کنیم.
Our starting point as designers to make clothes that women feel like they're choosing to wear as forms of self-expression rather than as instruments of kind of torture or social control.
لباسایی که من اعتقاد دارم خیلی از مخاطبهای ما حتی اونها رو خارج از ایران میپوشن و خانم‌هایی که غیر ایرانی هستن اونها رو به عنوان پیرهن ازشون استفاده
And it's
میکنن.
delightful to see that their designs traveling outside the country for women who even don't have those restrictions, enjoying their creativity. That's amazing. The other aspect, obviously, the other half of the equation is the way you conduct business in Iran, which is so incredible, inventive, and I think is incredibly clever. Tell us how you take the lemon and make it into lemonade.
Oh, it's very hard for us, not just as emerging designers, but also we are Iranians and live in Iran. We have faced lots of sanctions, lots of restrictions. Sourcing fabric, finding production houses, convincing production houses to make our pieces, all these problems, we take them aside and we are in Iran. We have problems to send our products outside of Iran because we have just Iran Post, not FedEx, not everything.
No logistics,
DHL,
no logistics available.
the banking system is
On lockdown. Completely.
yes, that's the problem.
Yeah.
But we find ways,
And you
we
thrive.
try our best to find the way, and I believe we did. So we just go through Instagram. We try to take the best pictures we can and show to the customers, and they order the clothes via Instagram, and it takes us a long way to send them the clothes, but we try to make it.
Right. No, that's amazing. And I have to say, they have an incredibly... I have to say that you have an incredibly thriving business, fanatical audience, passionate and loving followership. When I kind of read your comments on your Instagram, it makes me want to cry. It's just clearly something over and above fashion. I see the time is running out. There was one other thing I wanted to potentially talk about. Or should we talk about something else? It was so boring. I thought maybe, Hoda Jan, I wanted to talk very briefly. You don't want to do it?
I think you should ask them their
You
inspiration.
should ask them something else.
There's-
Okay, so maybe Shirin.
Okay.
Shirin, tell me, what do you want to do next? Like, where next? What do you want to do? What's the future? You've made this work. This was almost impossible, and you did it. What do you want to do next? What's next for you?
درسته که خیلی شرایط برای ما سخت از لحاظ سیاست توی ایران، ولی از اونجایی که این کشور ماست، خانواده‌مون اونجا هن.
Politics makes it very difficult for us to act and to work, but this is our country
و
and it's our home. So.
ما واقعا خیلی با تمام همه مشکلاتی که داریم میتونیم از پس همه مشکلاتمون بر بیایم و داریم از کارمون لذت میبریم توی ایران.
Despite all the challenges, this is our country, we are committed to it, and we're actually having fun doing what we do.
ولی اگر میتونستیم از ایران خارج بشیم با توجه به سیاستی که هستش و میتونستیم بیشتر کارمون رو پیش ببریم و موقعیت‌های خوبی برامون پیش میومد تا خودمون رو بتونیم بیشتر نشون بدیم، خیلی خوب میشد. و
It would be amazing if we could establish more contact with
The outside
markets and
world.
audience and
The outside world.
the outside. I don't want to use that expression. Like the inside world and the outside. You know, that she was just saying that how much more the business could achieve if they could connect with design, with talent, with production, and with the rest of the fashion industry abroad, because they have tons to offer. میخوای تمامش کنی؟
and
خاتم الجلسه.
و امیدوارم که بتونیم کارمون رو بهتر نشون بدیم و امیدوارم این اتفاق توی ایران بیفته ولی اگر این پیش نیاد ما سعی خودمون رو میکنیم تا کارمون رو خوب پیش ببریم و گسترش بدیم کارمون رو به کشورهای دیگه تا بتونیم با همه آدمایی که تو همه جا زندگی میکنن کارمون رو بدیم.
Yeah, I think that essentially she wants to express the wish that as a creative she wants to make clothes for all people, that even though she's overcoming current challenges and she's committed to running her business in Iran, she wishes to establish bonds and bridges to audiences to share her creativity with. So Hoda, beyond your work as a creative communicator, you've also taken steps in making a form of social enterprise that you've just maybe tell them briefly about.
Yeah, actually a lot of the inspiration came from meeting Shirin and Shiva and learning about the way that the underground fashion scene in Iran actually works and how localized and intimate the relationships they have with their, not just their customers, but also every single person in their supply chain. They actually brought snacks that their tailor had brought for them for their flight that I ate in their room. But so that understanding of this intimacy between the maker and all the way down to the producer, I think was just such a beautiful relationship. And as an abolitionist is basically the idea that industries that are inherently violent can't be reformed. So like slavery, you can't reform slavery. You have to get rid of it because you can tell a slave owner to be nicer, but that's not the same. And I think fast fashion is actually an industry that is quite the same. And I think fast fashion requires abolition. There's no way that we can ever create ethical fast fashion, no matter what, or sustainable fast fashion. And so a systemic... Thank you. Running out of time, so no, I'm kidding. So as my, I guess, abolitionist approach to the fast fashion industry is how can we think about the way in which our clothes are made systemically. And so I run Blue Tin Production, which is an all-women immigrant and refugee-run clothing manufacturing workers cooperative. So it's basically a bunch of women who now are my best friends, and we basically create clothes for designers around the world. And at wages that they've set internally, and everyone owns the business and gets to decide exactly what that looks like. And that has actually inspired in part by the relationship that we have as well.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was so inspiring. And for you to make the effort to come all the way from Tehran is,
Thank you.
we're really honored to have you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Brilliant.